Lucas Reed woke before the city began to stir the faint hum of a Seattle dawn wrapped in a cold drizzle that traced pale streaks down the windows of his narrow old townhouse. He sat at the kitchen table with a mug of cooling coffee cupped between his palms, studying the blueprint rolled open before him. The final phase of the Riverside Renewal Project stared back at him, every measurement and notation carrying the weight of a promise he had sworn to keep. The project bore the name of his younger brother, a name Lucas could barely think about without feeling the familiar ache settle deep in his chest. It was more than a construction effort. It was the last piece of redemption he still believed he deserved after the disastrous legal fight 3 years earlier when he had stayed silent while a corrupt official twisted zoning codes to push low-income families out of their homes. Lucas had sworn that silence would never happen again. Today, he needed to be at the site early to inspect the final foundation, pour a step that brought him closer to fulfilling the promise he had made beside his brother's hospital bed. Rain tapped steadily on the glass as he closed the blueprint and stood grabbing his jacket from the back of the chair. He checked the time. If traffic cooperated, he could be at the site before the crew arrived. For once, everything seemed to be holding together. Then, his phone vibrated on the counter. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Nothing good ever came from calls before 6 in the morning, but something made him swipe the screen anyway. A woman's voice slid through the speaker, tight with urgency, yet controlled in a way that suggested she was fighting not to fall apart. "I need a husband by tomorrow." Lucas froze in the middle of the kitchen jacket, half on the words hitting him with a strange cold weight that did not match the warmth of the room. For a moment, he wondered if he had misheard. The caller did not correct herself. She did not laugh or explain. She simply waited. He took a slow breath and asked who was speaking. She answered with a name he recognized but did not know personally. Evelyn Hart, Chief Financial Officer of the Urban Renewal Trust, the same trust that provided partial funding for the Riverside Project. He had seen her in 2 board meetings. Sharp, direct, principled, the kind of executive who refused deals that hid cruelty behind polished numbers. Now she was calling him like someone making a last stand. Lucas leaned back against the counter and shut his eyes for a beat. Everything in him wanted to end the call to tell her she had the wrong person to protect the one line he had vowed never to cross again. After the scandal 3 years ago, he had promised himself he would never tie his integrity to anyone else's desperation. Not legally, not emotionally, not ever. "Tell me why you called me," he said, his voice steady even as unease twisted in his stomach. Evelyn exhaled shakily, the sound soft but unmistakably real. "If I am not married by tomorrow," she said, "I lose my position as voting authority in the trust. My uncle would take control, and he has already lined up a redevelopment plan that will evict thousands. The trust clause requires spousal disclosure and shared residency for 90 days to prevent manipulation." Lucas pressed a hand against the edge of the counter. He knew of the uncle, a man who used the language of progress to disguise exploitation. If he gained power, communities like Riverside would be gutted. Evelyn continued, "I do not want a performance. I do not want to bargain with someone who expects influence in return. I need someone the board cannot buy. You fit the criteria." Lucas let silence fill the space between them. He could almost hear the rain outside intensify, as if the city itself were waiting for his answer. Accepting her proposal would entangle him in a legal and public firestorm that could jeopardize the project that meant everything to him. But refusing her might condemn entire neighborhoods to displacement, including the Riverside community he had sworn to protect. His throat tightened. 3 years ago, he had failed to stand up when it mattered. He had failed his brother. He had promised never again. Yet, a marriage, even a legal one, felt like a step into a territory he had avoided his entire life. A territory where personal boundaries blurred and intentions became weapons. Lucas spoke slowly. "You understand what you are asking me?" "Yes." Her voice did not waver now. "I will not manipulate you." You can say no, but I will not lie about why I asked." He opened his eyes and stared at the quiet kitchen at the blueprint still rolled on the table at the life he had built so carefully out of discipline and distance. He felt something shift inside him, a tension between past failure and present responsibility. Marrying her might save her empire. It might save Riverside, but it could destroy the man he had spent years rebuilding piece by piece. A man who finally believed he had learned when to say no. The line he had drawn for himself suddenly felt impossibly thin. He inhaled once long and steady as the morning light struggled through the gray sky outside. Then he answered her with words he knew would change everything, even if he did not yet know how. "Tell me what comes next." The rain had slowed to a mist by the time Lucas reached his office, a renovated brick warehouse overlooking the gray stretch of Elliott Bay. He barely remembered the drive. His mind kept circling the same questions, none of them offering relief. Why him? Why marriage? Why now? He stepped inside the quiet space, switched on the lights, and set his soaked jacket over the back of a chair. The phone call still echoed in the corners of his thoughts, refusing to fade. He was pouring himself a second cup of coffee when the elevator doors opened. He looked up. Evelyn Hart stood there. In person, she seemed even more composed than her voice had suggested, though exhaustion clung to her like a shadow. Her dark hair was pinned neatly despite the weather, and her tailored coat was buttoned to the collar. She carried a slim folder against her chest as if it were the last barrier between herself and collapse. Lucas set the mug down. "You came here." Evelyn stepped forward, letting the elevator drift shut behind her. "I thought asking you to make life-changing decisions over the phone was unfair. You deserved to hear everything face to face." She stopped at the small meeting table near the windows, the misty bay behind her. Her posture was straight, almost rigid. Not fearful, just holding herself together. Lucas approached slowly, watching the way she gripped the folder with both hands. Before anything else, he said, "You need to know that I have not made any decision." She nodded once. "I know. That is why I am here." She opened the folder and laid out several documents. Trust agreements, board voting rules, the specific clause that had become a loaded landmine in her life. Lucas recognized some of the language. He had reviewed the trust guidelines before accepting partial funding for Riverside, but he had not seen this clause. It required any primary voting authority to establish a verified marital status within 60 days after assuming control, followed by 90 days of shared residency disclosure, all to prevent a single stakeholder from being exploited or coerced by outside investors. Evelyn tapped the paragraph with a steady finger. "My father wrote this. He wanted to protect the trust from hostile takeovers. He never imagined it would be used against his own daughter." Lucas studied her closely. "And your uncle is ready to challenge you. He already did." Her voice remained calm, but her jaw tightened. "The board scheduled a review for tomorrow at 4:30. If I am not married by then, the authority transfers to him automatically. He has redevelopment plans that will displace entire communities under the guise of efficiency. You saw what he did during last year's zoning battle." Lucas remembered all too well. Backroom deals, manufactured evidence, communities torn apart by profit disguised as progress. And the man had nearly destroyed Riverside until public outcry stalled the project. Almost. Evelyn continued. "I refused to sign the fast-track proposal he pushed into our quarterly review. If he gains control, he will revive it. And worse. That is why I need someone the board respects. Someone they know cannot be bought. Someone with a clean record and a reputation for integrity." Lucas exhaled slowly. "That is not an easy reputation to maintain. I know about the scandal 3 years ago." She said it gently, without accusation. "You were one of the few people who chose to face the aftermath instead of hiding behind your team. You stood publicly against the corruption you used to tolerate. And since then, you have rebuilt trust with communities most people overlook." Her gaze held his steadily. "The board knows your character. They may not all like you, but they trust your honesty. That is what I need." Lucas leaned his hands on the back of a chair, letting her words settle. A marriage of legal necessity. A partnership no one could misinterpret as romantic. A shared residency with a woman who clearly valued principles as fiercely as he did. And a 90-day period where the smallest misstep could jeopardize everything he had built. Evelyn continued, speaking her voice low but resolute. This is not about saving my job. It is about preventing a man with a history of exploitation from gaining power he should never have. I am not asking for a performance. I am not asking for affection. I am asking for someone to help me protect what the trust was designed to safeguard. He studied her expression. No entitlement, no theatrics, just a woman standing at the intersection of responsibility and desperation. What about your personal life? He asked. No partner, no family objections. Evelyn gave a faint, dry laugh. My last relationship ended when I refused to push through that harmful redevelopment contract. He said I cared more about strangers than about him. Maybe he was right. Her eyes flickered as if she were remembering a different life she no longer had time to mourn. Lucas looked at the documents again. Every line spelled pressure. Every requirement spelled risk. And yet, every instinct he had told him Evelyn was not manipulating him. She was telling him the truth. She closed the folder slowly and met his eyes. You can say no. I would understand. I am not offering anything in return. I cannot promise convenience or comfort or even privacy. The only thing I can offer is honesty. Absolute honesty. He held her gaze for several long seconds. Rain streaked down the window behind her, blurring the horizon. She stood like someone who had run out of places to turn. She was not pleading. She was giving him the dignity of choice. And something about that struck him harder than any argument could have. Her final words came quietly. I will not lie about why I asked. Lucas felt a tension coil inside him, not unpleasant but undeniable, a tug between the man he used to be and the man he had sworn to become. A man who chose principles even when they cost him dearly. He lowered himself into the chair across from her and rested his forearms on the table. Then tell me everything. Evelyn did not speak right away. She sat across from Lucas with her hands folded atop the closed folder, steady in a way that made him realize she had likely rehearsed this conversation dozens of times and still found no version of it that felt safe. The silence between them grew thick, not uncomfortable, but weighted with the decision she was asking him to make, one that could alter both of their lives in ways neither fully understood. Finally, she began. 3 months ago, the board voted to put my uncle under internal review. They suspected he manipulated financial forecasts to push out smaller community partners. He barely avoided sanctions, but he has been preparing for another power grab since. Lucas leaned back slightly, his attention sharpened. Evelyn continued. He found a loophole. The trust clause. It was meant to protect the voting authority from being coerced, but it can also be weaponized against someone who does not have a spouse to fulfill the residency disclosure requirement. That loophole is my vulnerability. The review tomorrow will confirm my marital status. If I fail, they have to transfer the authority to him. She paused, letting the implications settle between them. Lucas understood it perfectly. She needed marriage not for love or appearance, but for verification, stability, and legal validation. Anything less would collapse beneath scrutiny. Evelyn exhaled slowly. I thought I had more time, but the board moved up the review after my uncle's attorney filed a challenge. Lucas looked down at the folder, then lifted his eyes back to hers. Why me? She did not hesitate. Because you would tell the truth even if it cost you. Because you have already chosen public accountability over self-preservation. And because you cannot be influenced by him. He is terrified of people he cannot control. Lucas felt something twist inside him. Respect. Recognition. A sense of strange and unexpected alignment. He had spent years rebuilding his reputation not for praise, but because he could not live with the kind of man he had been before. And now, a woman who barely knew him was telling him she trusted the very part of him he had worked hardest to restore. It should have made the decision easier. It did not. He straightened in his chair. "I need to be clear about something. I have not agreed to anything." Her chin lifted slightly. "I know. That is why I want to explain everything before you decide." Lucas rubbed the bridge of his nose, thinking, "If we marry, even legally, it will attract attention. It will invite scrutiny. If the press thinks it is a ploy, they will come after both of us. You could lose your credibility. I could lose my work." Evelyn nodded. "I understand. And you should also know that the residency requirement is non-negotiable. We would have to live at the same address." Lucas let out a slow, measured breath. The commitment, even without romance, was enormous. Marriage on paper was still marriage in the eyes of the board, the trust, the law, and the relentless public appetite for narratives of scandal and ambition. Evelyn watched him carefully. "I will never ask you to pretend to love me. I will never ask you to lie for me. And if at any point this arrangement threatens your principles, you can walk away." He studied her expression again. She meant it. She was offering transparency, not safety, and that made her request both more dangerous and somehow more honorable. Lucas stood abruptly, moving toward the window. The bay was a silver sheet behind the mist, and the distant cranes of the harbor rose like silhouettes of unfinished promises. He braced one hand against the glass. "I need a moment." Evelyn remained seated, her posture still straight but her breathing slightly uneven. "Of course. Take all the time you need." Lucas closed his eyes. He remembered the courtroom 3 years ago, the moment he realized he could no longer justify his silence. He remembered his brother's voice telling him that doing the right thing was not supposed to feel easy, and he remembered how it felt when he failed to act. The guilt had lived under his ribs ever since. Now he had a choice that was not simple, but was undeniably right. But right did not mean safe. After a long stretch of quiet, he turned back toward her. "I cannot make you a promise," he said. "Not about feelings, not about pretending, and I will not agree to anything that requires us to lie." Evelyn rose slowly to her feet. "I am not asking for promises." He met her gaze fully. "But if I say yes, there are conditions." 3. She nodded. "Tell me." He approached the table again and rested both hands on its edge. "First, no performances, no staged affection for the press. If anyone asks, we tell them the truth. The truth is that this marriage began as a necessity. Second, you do not interfere in my work or use my name to influence the trust. I help you maintain control, but I am not a tool for leverage." Evelyn's eyes softened with something like relief. "And the third?" Lucas held her gaze. "When the contract ends, neither of us holds the other to it. No pressure, no expectation, no emotional debt. When the 90 days are over, we walk away freely unless both of us choose otherwise." A flicker of something undefinable crossed Evelyn's face. Not disappointment, not fear. Something closer to understanding. She gave a single, small nod. "I accept all 3. Lucas inhaled. The room felt undeniably smaller now, as if the walls were bearing witness to a decision that would shape their futures in ways neither could foresee. He extended his hand across the table. "This is not a promise. This is a boundary. If we do this, we do it with honesty." Her eyes lowered to his hand for a moment before she placed hers in it. Her palm was cool, steady, and more vulnerable than she intended to reveal. Then, with both quiet resolve and unspoken caution, she said, "Then, honesty is what we start with." The air outside the Seattle courthouse smelled faintly of wet concrete and early morning exhaust, the kind of scent that clung to a city still deciding whether to wake gently or erupt into its usual weekday rhythm. Lucas and Evelyn stood at the base of the steps for a long, quiet moment, each holding the weight of the decision they had made only hours earlier. No one passing by gave them a second look. They appeared to be just 2 professionals heading into a legal building, not 2 strangers about to bind their lives in a way both irreversible and precariously fragile. Evelyn adjusted the collar of her coat, her fingers trembling only slightly. Lucas noticed but said nothing. She had not slept. He had not either, but there was no room left for hesitation now. He opened the courthouse door for her, and she stepped inside without thanking him, not out of rudeness, but because gratitude felt inappropriate for something so heavy. The interior was quiet, lit by a mixture of fluorescent hum and gray daylight filtering through tall windows. A lone security guard glanced up as they passed through the checkpoint. No questions, no recognition, no alarm. They climbed the stairs toward the civil registry office. Each step seemed to echo with a significance neither dared to speak aloud. When they reached the small waiting area outside the clerk's office, Lucas checked the time. The board review was scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. Every hour mattered. Evelyn sat on one of the hard plastic chairs, smoothing out the paperwork she had spent half the night preparing. Her hair was pinned back tightly, not out of vanity but necessity. Her eyes carried the steady alertness of someone walking a tightrope with cameras watching from below. Lucas remained standing, hands in his pockets, scanning the hallway out of old habit. The last time he had been in a building like this, it had been for depositions during the scandal that nearly ended his career. The memory left a faint taste of metal on his tongue. The clerk called their names. Evelyn rose first. Lucas followed her in. The room was small, nearly cramped, with a desk stacked with forms and a judge standing near a filing cabinet adjusting his reading glasses. Judge Marshall, a man in his early 60s with a calm demeanor, looked up at them with polite neutrality. He had officiated thousands of civil ceremonies. This one would not earn a place in his memory. Evelyn offered a respectful nod. "Thank you for seeing us on short notice." The judge gave a non-committal grunt and motioned for them to stand before the desk. "Do you have your identification and the completed forms?" Evelyn handed over the documents. Lucas produced his license. The judge examined everything with mild disinterest, only pausing to confirm their signatures. Then he looked up. "Do you wish to proceed?" The question hung in the air like a final checkpoint before the ground shifted beneath their feet. Evelyn answered first. "Yes." Her voice did not waver. Lucas replied with equal clarity. "Yes." The judge began the brief legal script required for civil marriage. There were no vows, no exchange of rings, no ceremonial language about love or devotion, just a confirmation of consent, acknowledgement of legal responsibilities, and the signatures that would bind their names together in state records. As they repeated the required affirmations, Lucas watched Evelyn from the corner of his vision. Her expression remained composed, but her throat constricted slightly each time she swallowed. She was not scared. She was resolute. The distinction mattered. When it came time to sign, Evelyn stepped forward first. She lifted the pen, hesitated for a fraction of a second, then began to write her name with deliberate care. Her hand shook once midway through the last stroke, but she steadied herself before the line was finished. Lucas noticed that, too. She stepped back. Lucas took her place, the pen cool between his fingers. His signature flowed effortlessly, though a quiet tension rested in his chest. The judge took both forms, stamped them, and placed them in a file. Then he looked at them with a faint, almost weary smile. "Congratulations." The word felt strangely out of place, like a label applied to the wrong object. Evelyn nodded politely. Lucas said nothing. They left the room without ceremony. No applause, no photos, no lingering. In the hallway, the weight of the moment pressed more firmly on them. They were married. Legally. Irrevocably, for now. The courthouse corridors seemed even quieter as they made their way toward the stairs. Evelyn paused at the landing, leaning lightly against the rail as though the act of signing her name had drained more from her than she expected. Lucas stood beside her but kept a respectful distance. "Are you all right?" She gave a short breath that was not quite a laugh. "I am fine." It is just strange to realize how quickly a life can turn into paperwork. Lucas understood that feeling all too well. The clerk had given them a copy of the certified document. Evelyn held it now folded neatly inside an envelope. She stared at it for a long moment before speaking again. "Thank you for doing this without asking for anything." Lucas shook his head. "I asked for honesty. That is something." She met his eyes. "And I meant it when I said I would give you that." They walked toward the exit. A gust of crisp air greeted them when they stepped outside, carrying the faint scent of rain-soaked pavement and the metallic tang of the waterfront breeze. People moved around them, oblivious. No one knew that a billionaire builder and a trust executive had just entered a marriage neither of them had planned to have that week or that year, or perhaps in any imagined version of their lives. At the base of the courthouse steps, Evelyn paused again. "This is not how my father imagined my marriage would look." Lucas looked toward the street. "Nor mine. No humor, no bitterness, just truth." They walked to the curb where a quiet black sedan waited, the same one Evelyn had arrived in. Before she opened the door, she turned slightly toward him. "We should discuss logistics. When can I move in?" Lucas exhaled once, steadying the shift in reality. "Today. The sooner the better." She nodded. "Then I will meet you there within the hour." As she slipped into the car, Lucas watched her close the door with a measured calm that did not hide the storm of responsibility she carried. The sedan pulled away from the curb, leaving him alone on the sidewalk. For a long moment he stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes following the retreating car. This was not a step he had taken lightly, yet it was one he could no longer avoid. The line he had sworn never to cross was behind him now, and the only path left was forward. Evelyn arrived at Lucas's townhouse just after noon, carrying only 2 suitcases and a laptop bag, the kind of luggage that suggested she had packed in haste but with precision. The sky outside had cleared slightly, leaving the air cool and sharp, and a faint gleam of sunlight filtered through the thin veil of clouds. Lucas opened the door before she could knock twice. His home was tidy, but lived in a place built for function rather than display. Exposed brick walls, narrow stairwell, hardwood floors worn smooth by years of footsteps, a drafting table in the corner covered with sketches, a coffee mug still half full beside it. Evelyn stepped inside quietly. She looked around, not with judgment, but with the careful awareness of someone entering a life she had no intention of disturbing. Lucas closed the door behind her. "I cleared the second bedroom," he said. "It has a desk if you need to work and plenty of space for your things." She nodded, grateful and slightly uncertain. "Thank you." He carried one of her suitcases up the stairs, leaving her to take in the space at her own pace. It was the first time since the courthouse she had been alone with her thoughts, and the weight of the new reality pressed in more sharply than before. This was his home. These were his walls, his belongings, his routines. She was a disruption, no matter how temporary. When Lucas returned, he found her standing in the living room, her gaze drifting across the framed photographs on the shelf. None of them were elaborate. A construction crew at a project's groundbreaking. A group of volunteers painting over graffiti. A picture of Lucas with a younger man who looked unmistakably like him, except for the easy grin lighting his face. Evelyn paused on that one. "Your brother." Lucas's jaw tightened slightly, but he answered without hesitation, "Yes." She waited for him to elaborate, but he did not. Instead, he gestured toward the kitchen. "Do you want coffee or tea?" Evelyn managed a faint smile at his formality. "Coffee is fine." He moved around the kitchen with quiet efficiency, filling the kettle measuring ground, setting out mugs. The silence between them was not hostile. It was cautious, like 2 people testing the edges of an unfamiliar boundary. When the coffee was ready, Lucas handed her a mug and leaned against the counter. "There are a few things we should discuss if we are going to make this work." Evelyn lifted the mug to warm her hands. "All right. First, he said you should feel comfortable here. Use what you need. Take whatever space you need. This is your home too for the next 90 days. She gave a small nod. "And second," he hesitated, choosing his words carefully, "we are not living as a couple. No performances, no expectations. Privacy matters. If you need a lock for your door, I will install one." Her eyes softened with gratitude that surprised her. "Thank you for saying that." Lucas shrugged as if it were obvious. Respect makes arrangements easier. She sat on the edge of the sofa, setting her mug on the coaster. "I appreciate the clarity." He nodded slightly. Clarity was something he relied on, something he could control. They spent the next hour discussing logistics. Shared residency documentation, mail forwarding, financial audits, schedules, how to handle questions from the board and the press. Each detail was approached with precision, though both of them avoided discussing anything personal. When the conversation lulled, Evelyn excused herself and carried the rest of her luggage upstairs. Lucas remained in the kitchen rinsing dishes he had no memory of dirtying. His home felt different now, not invaded but shifted. There were 2 coats hanging by the door instead of 1, 2 mugs on the counter, a presence settling into the space he had kept carefully steady for years. He walked to the living room and opened the windows, slightly letting fresh air move through. From upstairs, he heard faint movement, drawers opening and closing, the soft thud of a suitcase being set down. Not intrusive, just new. When Evelyn finally came back downstairs, she looked noticeably more settled. Her hair was looser and her expression carried a gentler tension. She stood near the bookshelf, fingers brushing lightly across the edges of old engineering manuals and design notebooks. "You built this place yourself," Lucas nodded. "Gradually. Mostly on weekends. It was a quiet project." She considered that. "Your home feels like a place someone repaired more than once?" He gave a faint exhale that almost resembled a laugh. "That is accurate." Evelyn crossed her arms lightly. "Then I will try not to disturb the stability you have rebuilt." The sincerity in her tone struck him unexpectedly. "You are not a disturbance," he said before he could overthink it. "This arrangement is practical for both of us." She looked at him as though she recognized the truth and the restraint layered beneath it. Later in the afternoon, Lucas went to the drafting table and began reviewing site notes for the Riverside inspection scheduled for the next morning. Evelyn moved to the small desk near the window with her laptop, typing quietly. Hours passed in comfortable silence. No forced small talk, no need to fill the room with anything other than their mutual purpose. As daylight faded, Evelyn rose, stretching slightly. "I should make dinner." "You do not need to," Lucas said immediately. "I usually just reheat something or eat at the site." She shook her head. "If we are sharing a home, then sharing one meal seems reasonable." She opened the refrigerator and laughed quietly at the sight of its contents. "You live like a man who forgets food exists." He glanced over his shoulder. "I eat what I need." She shook her head again. "Not tonight." She found pasta tomatoes and a small bundle of basil that had somehow survived longer than expected. Lucas watched her cook, noticing that despite her exhaustion, her movements were practiced and calm. The scent of garlic and simmering tomatoes filled the kitchen, warming the cool air. They ate at the small dining table, both a little awkward at first, but the warmth of the food eased the tension. Evelyn took a bite and sighed. "This is the first real meal I have had in 2 days." Lucas set down his fork. "You have been under pressure." "Not an excuse," she said, "but thank you." When they finished eating, Evelyn stood to wash the dishes. Lucas reached for a towel to dry. They worked side by side without speaking. The quiet felt different now. Not avoidance, not distance. Something that resembled the first fragile thread of shared existence. When the dishes were done, Evelyn stepped back, wiping her hands on a towel. "It was a long day." "You should rest," Lucas said. "So should you." She gave him one last, tired but genuine nod, then headed upstairs. Lucas watched her climb the steps, her silhouette outlined by the soft hallway light. When she disappeared behind the bedroom door, he finally allowed himself a long, slow breath. He had expected chaos. Instead, he found a strange stillness settling over the house. They were sharing a space, but not a life. Not yet. But, for the first time, the arrangement felt less like an intrusion and more like the quiet beginning of something neither of them intended, but both of them were now undeniably part of. The next morning began quietly with the faint click of cabinets and the low boil of water on the stove. Evelyn woke earlier than expected. Her mind heavy, yet strangely calmer after a night spent in a room that did not belong to her but somehow allowed her to breathe without the tightness she had carried for days. When she stepped downstairs, she found Lucas already in the kitchen, dressed in work boots and a gray flannel shirt, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. He glanced up when he heard her. "Morning." His tone was neutral, but there was a softened edge to it, something like acknowledgement that neither of them could fully name yet. "Good morning," she replied, taking the mug he held out. She wrapped her hands around the warmth and leaned lightly against the counter. Their morning routine fell into place more naturally than either expected, with minimal conversation but no tension. It was simply two people occupying the same space with quiet respect. Lucas studied the clock. "I need to head to the Riverside site. The board still has inspectors checking every inch of the project." Evelyn nodded. "Evelyn, I would like to see it." Lucas hesitated. "There will be reporters nearby. They are waiting for anything that confirms a story." She held his gaze steadily. "If people are going to speculate about this marriage, it might as well be while we are doing something meaningful." He considered her for a moment, then gave a single nod. "All right." They drove together, the city passing in streaks of gray and blue through the windshield. At the construction site, workers waved at Lucas with easy familiarity. Some nodded politely at Evelyn, unsure of how she fit into his world. Lucas introduced her without fanfare. "This is Evelyn Hart. She oversees the trust funding." The crew accepted that explanation without question. It was simple, clean, not a lie. The site buzzed with the rhythm of hard labor drills, humming metal, clanging voices, shouting instructions across scaffolding. It was the kind of place where purpose lived in every sound. Evelyn watched Lucas as he walked through the site, inspecting beams, checking measurements, greeting crew members by name. He belonged here in a way few people ever belonged anywhere. Even without the title of billionaire, he moved with the grounded steadiness of someone who knew the value of foundations, both literal and personal. One of the foremen approached them. "The inspectors are slowing everything down. They are looking for any excuse to freeze progress." Lucas nodded grimly. "I know. We will work around it." Evelyn observed the exchange, noting how the team trusted him without hesitation. That was not the kind of loyalty a person bought. It was earned one honest decision at a time. As they continued their walk, she noticed a group of people gathered near the site entrance, some holding microphones, others snapping photos. Reporters. Lucas stiffened slightly. They heard about the courthouse filing. Evelyn inhaled slowly, preparing herself. It was inevitable. One reporter shouted a question. "Mr. Reed, is it true you married for business reasons?" Another aimed at Evelyn. "Ms. Hart, are you using this marriage to block your uncle from seizing trust control?" Evelyn kept her expression neutral. Lucas stood beside her, hands at his sides, shoulders squared. They did not touch. They did not pretend. They simply stood together. The reporters continued calling out questions, probing, speculating, trying to capture any hint of scandal. Evelyn finally answered with calm clarity. "My marriage is not your story to bend." Lucas added nothing. His silence was stronger than any statement he could have made. They continued their inspection, leaving the reporters frustrated and unsatisfied. When the noise of the cameras finally faded behind them, Lucas gave her a brief look. "You handled that better than most public officials I know." Evelyn exhaled slowly. "My father taught me early. Panic feeds headlines. Honesty starves them." Lucas almost smiled. Almost. Later in the afternoon, a representative from the city arrived to evaluate a structural detail. He suggested a shortcut that would save time but compromise safety guidelines. Lucas refused instantly. "We are not cutting corners. Not on this project. Not ever." The representative appeared annoyed. "Your timeline will suffer." Lucas remained firm. "I can live with delays. I cannot live with a collapsed foundation 10 years from now." Evelyn observed the exchange closely, admiring the unwavering conviction in Lucas's voice. When the representative walked away frustrated, she approached him. "You could have taken that shortcut. Many people would have." Lucas shrugged lightly. Some lines are never worth crossing. His words echoed the ones he had spoken to her only days before. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, standing amid dust and sunlight and the rising frame of a building built for people who had nowhere else to go. Something shifted in that instant. Not romance, not affection. Something quieter. Recognition. Respect deepening into something more textured. By the time they left the site, the sun had begun lowering behind the skyline, casting the streets in muted gold. They stopped for groceries on the way home, walking the aisles without urgency. Lucas picked items with the practicality of someone who ate only because the body required it. Evelyn added vegetables, spices, things that made food taste like food. He raised an eyebrow at one of the jars she placed in the cart. "What is that?" "Flavor," she answered simply. At home, she cooked again, though this time the kitchen felt less like foreign territory. Lucas sliced bread while she chopped herbs. Their conversation remained light, almost non-existent, but the silence had changed shape. It felt like a shared room instead of two separate lives brushing past each other. They ate quietly. Lucas cleared the dishes while Evelyn dried them. When a plate slipped from her hand and clattered loudly against the sink, she startled. Lucas caught it before it could break. "Relax. It is not going anywhere." Their hands brushed. Neither pulled away immediately. A small moment, a crack in the wall they both kept around themselves. Later, while Evelyn retreated upstairs to answer emails, Lucas remained in the living room reviewing his notes for tomorrow's site meeting. Rain began again hitting the windows with a gentle rhythm. He found himself listening for the soft sound of her footsteps above an unfamiliar comfort he refused to name. Upstairs, Evelyn sat at the small desk staring at her laptop but not seeing the words. The sound of Lucas moving downstairs drifted through the house, steady and grounding. She realized she felt strangely safe here, not because she belonged, but because he did. And for the first time since the claws threatened everything she had built, she felt the faintest sense of possibility. One crack in the wall, small, unintentional, but impossible to ignore. The headlines broke before sunrise. Lucas woke to the vibration of his phone on the nightstand, the screen lighting the dim room with a flood of notifications he did not need to open to understand. He sat up slowly, rubbing a hand along his jaw, before finally unlocking the device. His name appeared in bold text across multiple news apps. Billionaire builder marries trust. Executive overnight. Marriage of convenience or power play. Sudden courthouse wedding sparks. Speculation. He exhaled a low breath. Evelyn had warned him the world would watch. He just had not expected the world to wake up this early. He dressed quickly and went downstairs to make coffee. The house was still dark, the early morning fog blurring the edges of the windows. He was pouring a second mug when he heard footsteps on the stairs. Evelyn appeared pale but composed, wearing a simple blouse and blazer, her hair pulled back with the same precision she brought to board meetings. She held her phone in one hand. Judging by the look on her face, she had seen the headlines too. "Good morning," she said, though it sounded more like a statement than a greeting. Lucas handed her the mug. "The news cycle is fast," he said. "This will fade if we let it." She gave a quiet, short breath that could have been a laugh. "Reporters never let anything fade if they sense blood." Lucas leaned against the counter, studying her carefully. She did not look panicked. She looked prepared, like a soldier walking into a battle she already knew the terrain of. She sipped the coffee, set the mug down, and met his eyes. "The board will expect documentation today. Proof of shared residency. Confirmation that the marriage is valid. They will search for any inconsistency they can use against us." Lucas nodded slowly. "Then we make sure there are none." Before either of them could say more, a knock sounded at the front door. Not gentle, sharp, persistent. Lucas's posture stiffened. "Reporters," Evelyn whispered. "Probably." He moved toward the window and pushed aside the curtain. Outside, at least a dozen journalists stood on the sidewalk, cameras raised, microphones ready. A black SUV with a local news logo idled at the curb. Lucas muttered something under his breath. Evelyn straightened her blazer. "They will not go away until they get something." Lucas looked at her. "You do not have to say anything." She shook her head. "Silence is a statement, too." They stepped outside together. The moment the door opened, the barrage began. "Mr. Reed, is this marriage a strategic alliance? Ms. Hart, did you force him into this? Mr. Reed, how long have you been romantically involved? Ms. Hart, are you using this arrangement to secure your voting authority?" Evelyn raised her hand slightly, not to shush them, but to ask for space. Her voice was steady when she finally spoke. "This marriage is legal. It is private, and it is not a matter the media has the right to twist." Lucas remained silent, which only fueled more questions. The cameras zoomed in. Microphones thrust closer. The press wanted a narrative, a scandal, a fracture. Evelyn continued, "I will not participate in speculation. My position remains unchanged. The trust clause is clear. My marriage status fulfills the legal requirement. That is all you need to know." Before the reporters could ask further, Lucas stepped forward, placing himself between Evelyn and the crowd. His tone was calm but resolute. "We will not be giving statements beyond that. Thank you." They returned inside to the muffled roar of journalists shouting after them. Evelyn leaned against the wall, exhaling shakily. "I hate the spotlight." Lucas offered a slight nod. "It never shows the truth." The rest of the morning moved quickly. Lucas gathered documents verifying Evelyn's new residency while she emailed the board's legal department. They coordinated statements, reviewed protocols, and ensured there were no discrepancies in their reported timelines. The pressure pressed on both of them, an unspoken weight thickening the air. Near noon, Evelyn received a message. "The board has called for a residency verification visit this afternoon." Lucas frowned. "That is fast." "It is strategic," she said. "My uncle wants to catch us unprepared." Lucas straightened. "Then we prepare." They spent the next hour aligning details, ensuring the house reflected accurate shared residency. She placed her laptop on the desk in the second bedroom. He added her name to the building mailbox. They reviewed any potential questions the board might ask. When the knock came, it was gentler than the reporters, but far more consequential. A two-person verification team from the trust stepped inside. They were courteous but observant, scanning the space with the meticulous scrutiny of people trained to detect fraud. One of them, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, asked politely, "May we see where Ms. Hart has stored her personal belongings?" Evelyn guided them upstairs, Lucas following behind. The inspectors asked questions. How long they had known each other, why the marriage was so sudden, what their morning routine looked like. The questions were intrusive but lawful. Evelyn answered with quiet clarity. Lucas answered with unwavering steadiness. No exaggerations, no embellishments, no pretending. When the inspectors left, the tension finally eased, but only slightly. Evelyn sank onto the sofa, rubbing her temples. "They want to believe this is a manipulation." Lucas sat across from her. "They will not find anything false." She nodded, though the worry clouded her eyes. Before she could speak, her phone buzzed. A message from her assistant. "Your uncle is giving an interview." Evelyn opened the link. On the screen, her uncle appeared sympathetic, composed, deeply concerned. He claimed she was unstable under pressure. He questioned the marriage. He framed himself as the voice of reason amid chaos. Lucas watched her expression tighten. "He is making you the problem," Lucas said. Evelyn lowered the phone. That has always been his strategy. Hours later, as evening settled and the weight of the day pressed down on both of them, Evelyn sat by the window staring at the darkening skyline. Lucas approached quietly. "You handled everything with composure." She shook her head. "I handled it with necessity." He sat beside her, not too close, but close enough that his presence felt like an anchor. "The press will twist the story for as long as it helps them. The board will scrutinize every detail. This is only the beginning." She turned slightly toward him. "I know, but thank you for standing beside me today. It meant more than I expected." Lucas held her gaze. "You do not owe me gratitude. I am part of this now." The city lights flickered outside, painting soft glows across their faces. For a brief moment, they sat in silence. Two people bound not by affection but by responsibility. Yet something faint and unspoken hummed in the space between them. Not warmth, not trust, not yet, but the first fragile threads of alliance. The world was watching, and for reasons neither fully understood, they no longer feared it as much as they feared facing it alone. The morning after the verification visit felt heavier than any day before it, as if the air itself carried the weight of what was coming. Lucas woke before dawn, pulled on his boots, and glanced at the clock with a sense of dread coiled low in his stomach. He had planned to be on the Riverside site early to meet the engineering team, but a new email notification on his phone stopped him cold. It was from the City Infrastructure Review Board. Subject: immediate suspension of project activity. Lucas read the message twice before the full meaning hit him. Effective immediately, all work on the Riverside Renewal Project is frozen pending a formal investigation into financial irregularities tied to trust funding. His stomach dropped. This was not a coincidence. This had his uncle's fingerprints all over it. He walked downstairs, the wooden steps creaking under his weight. Evelyn was already awake, sitting at the dining table with her laptop open, her posture rigid. She looked up the moment she sensed him enter. "You saw it," she said quietly. Lucas nodded. "The project is suspended." She closed her eyes briefly, guilt clouding her features. "I am so sorry. This is my fault. My uncle has influence on the review board. He must have pressured them." Lucas set his phone on the table and sat across from her. "Do not apologize." He was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "You did not create this opportunity." He did. But Evelyn shook her head, fingers tightening around the edge of her laptop. "They used the trust account as justification. The pause is based on misinterpreted financial alignment between my office and your project, which means this marriage gave them what they needed to justify intervention." Lucas's jaw tensed. The Riverside renewal was more than concrete and steel. It was the last promise he had made to his brother, a promise built on redemption and responsibility. Stopping it now would condemn the neighborhood to another cycle of neglect. And worse, it would mean he had failed the one thing he believed he could still save. Evelyn watched his expression darken. "There is something else you need to know." Lucas lifted his eyes. "What?" She hesitated, then turned her laptop toward him. A document filled the screen. Minutes from a closed-door meeting, his uncle's proposal. If he gains voting authority tomorrow, he plans to terminate all existing partnerships with independent contractors, including yours. Lucas felt the ground tilt beneath him. "If that happens," she continued, "you will be permanently barred from bidding on any trust-funded renewal projects for the next decade." 10 years. A decade of work wiped away. A decade of communities he would never be able to help. A decade of watching corrupt executives build where they did not understand or care. His voice came out low and steady. "That would destroy my company." Evelyn swallowed guilt, tightening her throat. "I know, and I know that means this arrangement is costing you far more than you expected." Lucas rose abruptly from the table and walked to the window. He stared out at the fog drifting along the street, remembering his brother's smile, remembering the night he promised he would fix one thing in his life even if he failed at everything else. Riverside had been that thing, a way to rebuild, a way to honor a life lost too soon. And now it was slipping through his fingers because he had chosen to help Evelyn. He heard her footsteps approach softly behind him. "Lucas." Her voice wavered slightly. "You should not have to lose everything for a decision I forced you into." He turned sharply. "You did not force me." She met his eyes, her own lined with worry and something that looked like self-blame. "You agreed because you are a good man, and because you felt responsible for protecting communities the trust serves. Not because you owed me anything." Lucas leaned one hand against the wall, his breath slow and controlled. "If your uncle takes control, he can freeze all of my future work. Riverside will die. Everything I built will die with it." Evelyn's voice dropped to a whisper. "I know. That is why I'm stepping down." Lucas blinked, processing her words. "Stepping down." She nodded slowly, tears gathering but refusing to fall. "If I resign from my position before the review, he cannot claim manipulation tied to my role. The marriage becomes irrelevant. The trust clause does not apply. He gains temporary authority, but the board will require a new vote within 30 days. They will not choose him, not after his misuse of funds. I can protect the trust, and I can protect you." Lucas stared at her in disbelief. "You would give up your life's work." Evelyn's voice was firm. "If it means saving communities and saving Riverside, yes. I will not let my uncle destroy everything you and my father worked for." Lucas stepped closer, the intensity in his eyes pulling her breath from her lungs. "No," she blinked. "What?" "No," he repeated. "You do not get to sacrifice yourself for this. I made the choice. I entered this arrangement." "But," Evelyn shook her head, "I cannot let you lose everything. You should not pay the price for my family's corruption." Lucas's tone hardened. "You stepping down gives him power immediately. He will push through every exploitative project he planned. He will bulldoze neighborhoods to build high-rise developments that people cannot afford. You leaving would destroy far more than my company." Her voice broke soft but fierce. "Then what do we do? Because we are running out of time and he is winning." Lucas exhaled slowly, forcing calm into his voice. "We fight, together, but we do not give him what he wants. He wants chaos. He wants you cornered. He wants me compromised. We cannot let him break either of us." Evelyn's breath caught. The sincerity in his voice felt like a hand reaching through the storm to pull her upright again. Lucas turned back toward the window, staring out at the blurred horizon, the city slowly brightening beneath the morning sky. "Riverside is the last piece of my brother I have left. If I fail it, I fail him." Silence settled between them, thick and fragile. Then Evelyn stepped forward and placed a hand gently on the edge of the counter beside him. "You are not failing him." His eyes lifted to hers. She held his gaze. "And you will not lose Riverside. Not while I still have a voice left in that boardroom." For a moment, Lucas could not speak. The woman who had walked into his life asking for a husband was now the one standing between him and collapse. And she was doing it not because she owed him anything, but because she understood what was at stake. The stakes had shifted. This was no longer a marriage of necessity. This was a battle for everything they both believed in, and neither could afford to lose. The boardroom had never felt so cold. Even with the sunlight pooling across the polished table and the quiet hum of the city drifting through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the atmosphere carried a chill that made Evelyn's breath come thinner than usual. She stood at the far end of the long conference table, a place she normally avoided because it placed every eye directly on her. Today, she chose it purposefully. Today, she would not hide. Lucas watched from a corner near the glass wall. He was not part of the board and could not sit at the table, but he was allowed to attend as her spouse under trust transparency rules. He stood with his hands loosely clasped, his posture steady, but she saw the tension beneath it. She drew strength from that. The board members arrived one by one, placing their folders on the table, murmuring polite greetings that held more curiosity than warmth. Then her uncle entered. Absolutely composed, impeccably dressed, wearing the calm expression of a man who believed he had already won. He offered a thin, sympathetic smile in her direction. "Evelyn, I heard the press has been relentless. If you need to take a leave of absence, we can arrange." "We are beginning," she said, her voice crisp, leaving no space for him to finish. The room stilled. She opened her binder and looked at each board member. "As you know, my marital status has been verified, fulfilling the clause established to protect this trust from outside influence. The verification team performed a full inspection and submitted documentation early this morning." Her uncle leaned back in his chair. His tone was mild, but his eyes were sharp. "Yes, yes. A sudden marriage. Quite unusual timing. Some might say suspicious." Evelyn felt heat rise under her skin, but she did not let it reach her expression. Unusual does not equal illegitimate, and suspicion does not equal evidence. The board members exchanged looks. She continued, "Before we address trust governance, I want to speak directly to the narrative that is already circulating publicly." She lifted her chin, steadying her voice. I married under legal necessity, not coercion, not manipulation, and not ambition. It was my decision based on circumstances created by this trust's own bylaws." Her uncle let out a small, patronizing sigh. "Evelyn, no one blames you for feeling overwhelmed. You are young, under pressure. It is understandable that the sharp crack of her binder closing silenced him. She did not raise her voice. She did not tremble. She simply stood straighter. Overwhelmed is not the word for someone who is trying to stop predatory redevelopment masked as progress. One of the board members cleared his throat. "Ms. Hart, perhaps we should focus?" She turned to the board, calm and direct. "No, we will not continue until the truth is stated plainly. My uncle has been working to secure control of this trust for months. He has pressured multiple departments, attempted to override ethical guidelines, and filed appeals using falsified justifications that were rejected by our compliance division." Her uncle laughed softly, a brittle sound masked as amusement. "Evelyn, the stress is affecting your memory." She did not break eye contact. "Then let us review your actions with documentation." She slid a stack of printed reports across the table. Financial inconsistencies, back-channel communications with private developers, attempts to expedite demolition permits without community hearings. Each page carried the weight of her father's legacy, something her uncle had forgotten in his hunger for control. A low murmur spread around the room. The board members leaned closer, reading quickly, unease carving lines across their faces. Her uncle's smile flickered. "This is mischaracterized. If I had the opportunity to speak fully—" "You have had many opportunities," Evelyn said, "and today I am taking mine." She stepped closer to the table. "I am not here to defend my marriage. I am here to defend the trust my father built." The air tightened, a collective inhale from the room. "You may question my judgment," she continued, "but you will not question my integrity, and you will not undermine the communities we are meant to serve." Her uncle straightened, anger flashing briefly behind his controlled facade. "You think the board will choose you over experience, over a lifetime of leadership." Evelyn's voice softened in a way that cut far deeper. "Leadership is not measured by how much power you gather. It is measured by how many people you protect while you hold it." Lucas felt something in his chest shift. Pride, admiration, a sense of recognition so sharp it left him breathless. Evelyn turned to him briefly, her eyes finding his not for reassurance but for confirmation. He gave a slight nod, a silent promise. She faced the board again. "I will not resign. I will not yield, and I will not allow my uncle's influence to jeopardize our mission. If the board wishes to replace me, then let that vote happen transparently. But let it happen with the truth on the table." One of the senior board members, a woman with gray hair tied in a low chignon, spoke up. "Ms. Hart, your willingness to stand here today despite personal and professional pressure speaks strongly in your favor." Her uncle's expression darkened. "This is absurd. You are letting sentiment cloud your judgment." The woman cut him off sharply. "No, we are letting accountability guide our judgment." Another board member added, "And we will not tolerate manipulation of the clause for personal gain." The tide had shifted. Evelyn watched it unfold with calm control, though her pulse pounded in her ears. Her uncle saw it too. His voice lowered to a menacing softness. "You think you have won?" Evelyn exhaled quietly. "I think the truth finally has a chance to breathe." The chair of the board called for a temporary recess. The members filed out, carrying Evelyn's documents, whispering, reconsidering. When the room emptied, Evelyn finally let herself release a long, trembling breath. Her hands shook slightly as she gathered her notes. Lucas approached slowly. "You did what most people would have run from." She swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I did what I had to." He shook his head gently. "No, you stood where it hurt. That is different." She looked up at him, then truly looked. The fight, the honesty, the cost she carried so quietly, and the way she chose to stand alone until the moment he stepped beside her. For the first time since their marriage, something in her expression softened completely. "Thank you, Lucas," she said. "Not out of necessity, not out of obligation, but out of something far deeper." He felt the truth of it settle between them, warm and steady. Outside the boardroom, footsteps signaled the members returning, but for one suspended moment, neither of them moved. She had stood where it hurt most, and he realized he had never admired anyone more. The hearing chamber was larger than the boardroom, designed not for private governance, but for public accountability. Rows of seats lined the back wall, already filling with reporters, community advocates, and city officials drawn by the swirl of rumors surrounding the trust clause and the sudden marriage that had become headline fuel. Cameras were allowed only in the hallway, but their absence did nothing to lessen the pressure in the room. Evelyn walked in first, shoulders-squared hair pulled back with deliberate precision. Her navy suit was simple, unadorned, but she wore it like armor. Lucas followed a half-step behind, not touching her, not leading her, but moving with a steady, quiet presence that made it clear he was there by choice, not performance. He took his place in the designated seating area for spouses. He had no right to speak during the hearing, but he would witness every second of it. The panel members, 3 trustees, 2 city-appointed auditors, and the chair took their seats at the front. There was a hush, the kind that falls before something irreversible begins. The chair tapped the gavel once. "This emergency review session is now in order. We will begin with opening statements." Evelyn stepped forward to the podium. For a moment, she let her gaze sweep across the room. She saw skepticism, curiosity, and in a few faces, hope. She inhaled slowly. "Thank you. I stand before you today, not to defend a marriage, but to defend the integrity of the trust my father built." A murmur passed through the room. She continued steady and unflinching. "There has been speculation about my recent marriage. Some claim it was strategic, some claim it was a manipulation of the clause. I am here to state transparently that the marriage began as necessity." A ripple moved through the panel, not surprise but confirmation. Evelyn pressed on. "What began as necessity has since become a choice. I remain in my role not because I am protected by technicalities, but because I have fulfilled the requirements set forth in this trust." Beside the wall, Lucas felt the words settle into him with quiet force. Her uncle rose from his seat at the opposite table. He had chosen to represent himself, claiming the right to speak as a senior stakeholder. His voice was smooth manufactured concern wrapped in practiced warmth. "With all due respect, the trust cannot operate under leadership that bends rules. The timing of this marriage insults the intelligence of every person in this room." Evelyn did not react, but the chair leaned forward. "Mr. Davenport, you will refrain from dramatics. Present factual evidence or sit down." Her uncle smiled thinly. "Very well." He lifted a folder of documents. "The financial inconsistencies tied to Riverside renewal suggest that Ms. Hart has already compromised her neutrality. This project is being used to justify her sudden personal decisions." A few gasps sounded from the audience. Lucas felt heat rising beneath his skin. Evelyn did not flinch. She lifted her own set of documents. "These are the corrected audit reports. And here are the communications showing Mr. Davenport's attempts to expedite redevelopment proposals that would displace thousands." She handed copies to the panel members, each page meticulously compiled. The chair reviewed one document, then raised his eyes. "Mr. Davenport, this outlines a pattern of unethical behavior." Her uncle's face sharpened. "Cleverly framed narratives cannot hide the truth." He turned sharply toward Evelyn. "You married a man you barely knew. You misled this trust, and you have allowed personal instability to cloud your decisions." Evelyn stepped forward, her voice firm. "My decisions have always been grounded in ethics, unlike yours." Her uncle slammed his hand against the table. "You are unfit to lead." She did not blink. "If the board wishes to remove me, they may, but they should do it with the truth in front of them." The chair interjected swiftly. "Ms. Hart, before we proceed, the panel has the right to question your spouse, as your residency verification is a matter of record." Lucas stood. He had expected this. He walked to the witness seat, each step measured. The panel member on the far left adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Reed, you may speak briefly. No prepared statements. Just answer our questions." Lucas nodded once. The chair asked the first question. Was this marriage entered into with full consent? "Yes," Lucas said. "Completely. Did you receive anything in exchange financially, professionally, or otherwise? No. Did Ms. Hart coerce or manipulate you? No." His answers were smooth, unwavering, but he felt his pulse thudding behind his ribs. One panelist leaned forward. "Why agree to marry someone on such short notice?" Lucas met their eyes. Because the trust clause left her vulnerable, and because she was fighting to protect communities that cannot defend themselves, and because someone needed to stand beside her when others were trying to push her out. That drew a murmur from the audience. The panelist continued. "And what about now? Do you regret your decision?" Lucas did not hesitate. No. The truth of it surprised even him. The room stilled. The chair nodded. "Thank you. You may step down." Lucas returned to his seat. Evelyn glanced at him only briefly, but in that brief glance something in her eyes shifted. Something warm, something unguarded. The chair turned back to the room. "We will now review the misconduct evidence presented against Mr. Davenport." Her uncle stiffened. "This is outrageous." "You will remain silent." The chair snapped. The panel sifted through pages of emails, proposals, flagged communications. The evidence was damning. When the chair finally spoke, the room held its breath. "Based on the document as presented, this panel finds significant cause to remove Mr. Davenport from any position of influence within the Urban Renewal Trust pending further investigation." A shockwave rippled across the chamber. Her uncle paled. "You cannot do this." The chair's tone was final. "It is already done." Evelyn stood still, absorbing the moment with a steady calm that bordered on disbelief. Then the chair continued. "Regarding Ms. Hart, the panel finds no evidence of misconduct, manipulation of the clause, or breach of fiduciary duty. She remains the rightful voting authority of the trust." Relief washed through the room, not loud, not explosive, but deep, earned, true. The chair offered a final line. "This hearing is adjourned." As the gavel struck, Evelyn exhaled, slow and trembling. Lucas reached her side without being asked. She looked at him with eyes that glimmered not with tears, but with something fiercer, triumph and gratitude, and something beginning to unfurl between them that neither of them was ready to name. The days following the hearing unfolded with a strange, almost disorienting quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm has burned itself out, leaving behind a sky that feels too open, too bright, too unearned. Evelyn returned to her office and found everything exactly where she had left it, the framed photograph of her father, the neat rows of reports, the small potted plant her assistant watered when she forgot. Yet the space felt different, lighter, as though the air itself recognized she no longer had to brace for attack. Her uncle was suspended pending investigation. The board respected her. The trust was safe, and for the first time in months she could breathe. But simplicity did not return. Something else had begun to shift, something far more personal. She knew it the moment she walked through the townhouse door that evening and found Lucas sitting at the dining table, papers spread before him, the late golden light falling across his shoulders. He looked up at her, not with the professional neutrality he had shown her at the beginning, not with the cautious distance of a man bound by necessity, but with an openness she had not expected, an openness that made her heartbeat stumble. "Welcome home," he said. She froze for just the smallest fraction of a second. Home. The word hit harder than it should have. She set her bag down and took a careful seat across from him. His expression shifted, becoming more serious. "The 90-day period ends tomorrow." They both knew this moment would come, but neither had prepared for the way it might feel. She exhaled slowly. Yes. He closed the folder in front of him. His voice was steady but quieter than usual. "After tomorrow, you are no longer bound to me. The trust no longer depends on this arrangement. You can choose your own path again." She nodded. "This marriage will not be questioned anymore. The clause cannot be used against me. The trust is protected. You are no longer at risk." He held her gaze. "And you are free to leave." The words made her chest tighten. She had expected him to say them. She had rehearsed several responses in her mind. None of them fit now. Instead, she said nothing, and the silence stretched between them, long, heavy, pulsing with everything unspoken. Lucas stood and walked toward the window. The sky outside had dipped into deep blue, streaked with hints of violet. He braced one hand on the frame. "I meant what I said at the beginning. No expectations, no pressure, no emotional debt. If you want to go, I will not stop you." It was the right thing to say, the decent thing, the honest thing, and yet each word felt like a slow break inside her. She clasped her hands to keep them steady. "I have to pack my things." He nodded without turning around. "Of course." She rose, but her legs felt strangely unsteady as she climbed the stairs. In the second bedroom she had been calling hers, she opened her suitcase and quietly began folding clothes she barely remembered wearing. Each soft rustle of fabric echoed in the stillness. 90 days. 90 days that were supposed to be paperwork and legality, duty and obligation. 90 days that became something far more tangled: late-night conversations, quiet dinners, silent companionship. The steady, grounding presence of a man who did not pretend and did not take and did not control. She folded another blouse, but her vision blurred. Leaving felt wrong. Staying felt dangerous in ways she could not articulate. A faint knock sounded at the door. Lucas's voice low even. "Do you need anything?" She swallowed. "No, thank you." The footsteps receded. She set the folded blouse aside and closed her eyes. She had made countless decisions in her life, high-stakes ones, fraught ones that shifted entire communities. Yet no decision had ever felt as impossible as this one. When she finally brought the suitcase downstairs, Lucas was sitting on the sofa, elbows resting on his knees, fingers clasped loosely. He looked up, and the tension in his expression was almost imperceptible, but she saw it. She always saw it. "I will take you wherever you want to go," he said quietly. Evelyn set the suitcase down by the door, her breath unsteady. "I have not decided where that is yet." He nodded, but something like disappointment flickered across his features before he masked it. She stepped closer. "Lucas," he lifted his eyes. She swallowed hard. "I want you to know that even if this marriage began from necessity, I never saw you as a loophole, or a shield, or a strategy. You were—" She hesitated, the word trembling at the edge of her tongue. "You were my choice." His breath faltered, but she continued before he could respond. "And now I need to make another choice, one that is mine alone." She looked toward the door, then toward him. Her pulse thudded painfully in her chest. This is the moment where the contract ends, where the obligation ends, and where whatever comes next can only happen if both of us want it. Lucas stood slowly. He stepped toward her, stopping far enough to respect her space, but close enough that she felt the warmth radiating from him. His voice was low, steady, certain. "If jag it has to be because you choose me. Not because the trust requires it. Not because you feel responsible. Not because you owe me anything. Because you want to." She felt her breath catch. The house felt too still. The night too quiet. Her heart too loud. He stepped back, giving her space, giving her time, giving her the freedom he had promised on the first day. She looked at the suitcase, at the door, at Lucas, and realized with sudden clarity that fear was the only thing standing between her and the truth she already knew. But it was not a truth she could speak yet, not tonight, not while the last thread of obligation still lingered. She picked up the suitcase and whispered, "Tomorrow." His eyes softened, not hope, not relief, but something gentler, understanding. She walked upstairs again, suitcase in hand, leaving Lucas standing alone in the living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows across the floor. The contract ended tomorrow, and what remained after that would depend on a choice neither of them could make for the other. 1 year later, the morning light in Seattle looked different than it had the year before. Softer, warmer. Less like a battle waiting to be fought and more like a promise finally allowed to breathe. The Riverside Renewal Project was complete at last. What had once been abandoned lots and unsafe buildings had transformed into housing community centers. Green walkways, small cafes run by longtime residents, and murals painted by local teenagers who now had safe places to gather. On the official opening day, the air buzzed with quiet pride. Not the kind that made headlines, but the kind that lived inside people who had waited too long to be seen. News crews were kept far from the ceremony. That was intentional. This was not a political moment or a platform or a statement. It was personal. Lucas stood near the main courtyard, adjusting a string of lights one of the teenagers could not reach. His sleeves were rolled up, his hair slightly windswept, and there was a calmness in him that had not existed the year before. A steadiness born from letting go of guilt that had shadowed him for too long. A small group of residents waved at him, and he waved back, smiling in that rare way he saved only for places that felt like purpose. Behind him, footsteps approached. Soft, measured, familiar. He turned. Evelyn stood there wearing a simple cream dress that brushed her calves when the breeze touched it. Her hair fell in loose waves, and she held nothing but a small notebook and a quiet smile. She looked nothing like the CFO who had once carried a collapsing world on her shoulders. She looked like a woman who had finally allowed herself to rest. "You are early," Lucas said. She shrugged gently. "Old habit. I always arrive early to things that matter." His eyes softened. "This matters to you." He nodded. "It always will." She looked around at the finished project, her chest tightening with emotion at how far everything had come. She walked to one of the murals, tracing her fingers lightly along the edge of a painted river that represented renewal and memory. "Her father would have loved this," she whispered. Lucas stepped beside her. "He would have been proud of you." She looked up at him, her eyes warm. "And your brother would have been proud of you." Lucas inhaled deeply. He had not heard those words without pain in a long time. Now they grounded him instead of breaking him. As the final preparations wrapped up, people began arriving. Residents, young and old. Volunteers. Construction workers. City advocates. Friends. No journalists. No board members in suits. Just the people who had lived the story of this project long before it had blueprints. Evelyn moved to greet the residents, exchanging hugs, sharing stories, listening with the kind of attentiveness that had earned their trust. Lucas watched her for a moment. 1 year ago, he had stood beside her in the hearing room and realized staying with her no longer felt like a decision that required justification. It simply felt right. But they had not rushed. When the contract ended, she had chosen independence first. She had chosen healing, stability, honesty with herself before stepping into anything that resembled love. And he had respected that completely, even when it meant distance. They had spent that year gradually finding their way back to each other. Not through grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but through small, steady choices. Shared breakfasts after early site visits. Texts that read, "Have you eaten?" Meetings that turned into walks. Walks that turned into dinners. Dinners that turned into laughter. And laughter that turned into something unspoken but undeniable. Their bond, once contractual, had become something quiet and real, something built without urgency or pressure or expectation, something that grew on its own time. As the ceremony time approached, Lucas stepped onto the small wooden stage built by local carpenters. The crowd quieted. He held no microphone, no speech notes. He simply spoke. "Thank you for trusting us with your community. Thank you for letting us build something with you, not for you." The crowd murmured in agreement. Some clapped softly, some smiled. After Lucas stepped down, Evelyn walked up. She did not stand behind the podium. She stood in front of it, closer to the people. When I was younger, she said, my father taught me that community work is not about saving people. It is about standing beside them long enough for their own strength to carry through. Her eyes swept the courtyard. This past year reminded me of that. This project is not mine. It is ours. A sense of warmth spread through the crowd. After the ribbon was cut and the applause faded, people filtered back into the courtyard to enjoy food music and stories. Children ran between tables. Elderly residents sat beneath shade umbrellas. Volunteers passed out lemonade. Evelyn slipped away from the crowd and walked toward the nearby footbridge overlooking the water. Lucas followed, stopping beside her. "You disappeared," he teased lightly. "I needed a moment to breathe. Big day, big year." He nodded. The breeze carried the scent of fresh grass-wet wood and the faint aroma of coffee from the pop-up stand volunteers had set up. Evelyn looked out at the water, then at him. "You know," she said softly, "I have been thinking about something." Lucas's brow lifted slightly. "Dangerous." She smiled. "Maybe." She turned fully to him. "Do you remember the night before the contract ended?" His expression shifted. "Of course. You said if I stayed it had to be because I chose you." "Yes." She took a slow breath. "I did not stay that night because I needed to separate obligation from choice. I needed to know I could stand alone before choosing to stand with someone else." Lucas nodded. "I never wanted you to choose me because you felt trapped. I know." She stepped closer. "And I did not choose you then. Not yet. You chose yourself first. Yes. And then eventually I chose you." Lucas's breath caught, even though he already knew the truth. She continued, "But I never said it out loud. Not fully. Not in a way that leaves no room for doubt. So I want to say it now. Here, in the open." She looked around at the community, laughing, talking, living behind them. "This place exists because we both chose to do the right thing even when it cost us. But I am here because I want to be with you. Not as CFO, not because of a trust, not because of a deadline, but because you are the person I choose." Lucas stepped closer until only a breath separated them. His voice was low, roughened by emotion he rarely let show. "Evelyn." She held his gaze. "You gave me the freedom to walk away. Now I am giving myself the freedom to stay, and I want a life with you." The words settled in the air between them. Clear, undeniable, a choice made with eyes open, a choice made without pressure, a choice made in truth. Lucas exhaled slowly, a soft, almost disbelieving smile touching his lips. "Then let me choose too." Her pulse quickened. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden ring box. Not velvet, not gold, not diamond-crusted. Handmade, sanded by hand, sealed with beeswax. He opened it. Inside was a simple ring with a thin band and a small river stone set at the center. Found on the site during construction. Ordinary and miraculous at the same time. Evelyn breathed in sharply. Lucas held the box gently. "This time, there is no contract, no deadline, no hearing, no clause, just this. I choose you, not for 90 days, not for protection, not for duty, for life." The world around them faded. Children laughing, water flowing, music echoing, and yet it all felt like part of the moment too. Evelyn felt her eyes blur. She nodded once, then again, then finally whispered, "Yes." Lucas slid the ring onto her finger with hands steadier than he expected. She leaned in and kissed him softly. Not the first kiss of a contract, not a rushed kiss in fear or confusion, but a real kiss built on a year of choosing each other when no one was watching. When they finally pulled apart, people in the courtyard noticed the ring and began cheering. Not loud, not explosive, but warm, real. Lucas wrapped an arm around her waist and they walked back toward the celebration as partners, not in secrecy, not in quiet agreements, but in truth. Their wedding took place that evening right in the same courtyard. No designer gowns, no elites, no board members, no cameras. Evelyn wore a simple white summer dress borrowed from a neighbor. Lucas wore a clean shirt someone insisted he change into. Residents brought flowers from their own gardens and placed them in mason jars along the railing. Children gathered wild daisies and handed them to Evelyn as she walked through the courtyard, laughing through tears as petals fell at her feet. The local bakery provided a cake. The community guitarist played a soft melody. When they exchanged vows, Evelyn's voice trembled. Lucas's did too. They did not speak about forever or destiny. They spoke about choice, about showing up, about building a life not based on obligation, but on truth. When the sun set and the lights overhead flickered on, the celebration continued with music, dancing, and stories. Evelyn rested her head on Lucas's shoulder as they sat together watching the people who had shaped their story without ever knowing it. Lucas whispered, "Love did not save us." She smiled, finishing the sentence. Choice did. And we chose each other. If you are still here listening to the end of this story, then maybe you felt something in the quiet moments just as much as in the storm. Maybe you saw a piece of yourself in Evelyn fighting battles no one else understood, or in Lucas carrying guilt he did not deserve until someone finally looked at him and said he was more than his past. Stories like this are not really about billionaires or contracts or trust clauses. They are about the choices we make when no one is watching, the moments we stand beside someone, not because we have to, but because something in us recognizes their truth. So, before you go, I want to ask you something. If you were Evelyn facing a deadline that could destroy everything your father built, who would you trust enough to ask for help? And if you were Lucas, haunted by a promise you once broke, would you risk breaking your own rules to save someone you barely knew? Tell me in the comments which character you connected with the most. Was it Evelyn with her fierce honesty and quiet strength? Or Lucas with his steady presence and the courage to let someone see the parts of himself he tried to hide? Or maybe it was someone else, a resident in the community, a teenager painting a mural, a volunteer who showed up with lemonade on opening day. Because sometimes the side characters remind us that healing is never done alone. And I want to know something else too. Do you believe love is something we fall into or something we choose? This story says it is choice. That real love is built in the small moments, the early breakfasts, the late-night conversations, the shared silences that say more than words, the moments when staying is not an obligation but an act of courage. And as you think about that, think about the relationships in your own life. Who stands beside you even when it is hard? Who do you show up for even when it means taking a risk? Who would you choose again, not because you have to, but because your heart knows the truth? If this story touched you, if it made you pause, smile, ache a little, or breathe deeper, do not leave without hitting like. It tells YouTube that this story mattered to you and helps more people find their way to our little storytelling family. And if you want more stories like this, stories about love that grows in the quiet spaces, about second chances, about choices that change everything, make sure you subscribe. We have so many more stories waiting for you. Stories of billionaire romance, yes, but also stories of dignity, hope, and the kind of love that heals instead of demands. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new chapter. And please comment where you are listening from. I read every single one. I love seeing our storytelling community grow from Seattle to New York to Texas to London to Trinidad to the Philippines to South Africa and beyond. Your messages make these long nights of writing worth it. Before you go, share this video with someone who might need a reminder that they are allowed to choose love on their own terms. Someone who feels alone. Someone standing at a crossroads. Someone who needs to believe that healing is possible. And if you want a part 2 or a bonus chapter or even a story from another character's point of view, tell me in the comments. I listen. I always listen. Thank you for spending your time here. Thank you for choosing this story. Until the next one, take care of your heart. And remember, love is not an accident. It is a choice.